Order, order. I remind honourable members that there have been some changes to normal practices in order to support the new hybrid arrangements. Timings of debates have been amended to allow technical arrangements to be made for the next debate. There will also be suspensions between each debate. I remind members participating physically and virtually that they must arrive for the start of debates in Westminster Hall. Members are expected to remain for the entire debate. I must also remind members participating virtually that they are visible at all times to each other and to us in the Boothroyd room. If members attending virtually have any technical problems, they should email the Westminster Hall Clerk's email address, which is westminsterhallclerks@parliament.uk. That's Westminster Hall Clerks at Parliament.uk, Neil, if that gesture was that you couldn't hear us. I would also like to remind members that Mr Speaker has stated that masks should be worn in Westminster Hall when members are not speaking. And for Mr Shannon, obviously, as you're aware, you'll need to move to the horseshoe to participate later in the debate. I now call Elliot Colburn to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered E-petitions 300-535, 326-261 and 574-305, all relating to the Government's Action Plan for Animal Welfare. Since these petitions were launched, the Government has published its Action Plan on the 12th of May 2021, setting out the Government's plans, aims, ambitions across animal welfare. I know the Minister will want to go into more detail about the contents of this plan in her summing up, so I'll try not to steal all of her material, but I would just like to briefly say how much I welcome many of the commitments made in this plan, and it truly reflects, Mr Mundell, the fact that the UK is a nation of animal lovers and that the Government is keen to see the highest possible animal welfare standards put in place, not just in terms of our domestic aims and objectives, but also in terms of importing animals from overseas. Among the commitments made in the plan include three very specific commitments, all of which relate to one of the three petitions we are discussing here this afternoon. So I'm grateful to everyone who signed these petitions, who have demonstrated the power that they have to bring about change. If I can turn first to E-petition 300-535, entitled "The UK should ban the importation of shark fins." The prayer of this petition states, and I quote, that now we have left the EU, the UK has the ability to finally stop the importation of shark fins. They had previously stated that whilst in the EU it is not possible to unilaterally ban the imports of shark fins into the UK. Each year, roughly 75 million sharks are killed for shark fin soup, where their fins are brutally cut from their bodies and they are thrown back in the sea to die. Despite countries in recent years making an attempt to crack down on shark finning, no European country is yet to ban the importation of fins, meaning that loopholes still exist. Britain should become the first European country to ban the importation of shark fins before we lose these beautiful creatures forever. This petition closed with 115,382 signatures, including 155 from my own Carshalton and Wallington constituency. And I'm incredibly grateful to the petition creator, Robin, for taking the time to speak to me last week about why he started this petition in partnership with the charity Shark Guardian, and I pay tribute to them both for their incredible efforts. Now, as the government outlined in their response to this petition in November 2020, it is true that shark finning is an illegal practice in UK waters, but imports and exports mean that this is helping to keep the demand and consequently the practice alive. The prayer of this petition eloquently outlines the need for a ban, but I want to expand a little further. According to Shark Guardian, it is currently legal to bring 20 kilograms of dried shark fin into the UK, according to the fish and fish product allowances set by UK Border Force without declaration. 20 kilograms of dried shark fin potentially equates to hundreds of sharks being butchered dependent on their size. Many of these fins could belong to threatened shark species listed under CITES or the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. These could make their way into the UK illegally through this loophole. Also, it is also required to declare over £390 worth of goods to UK Border Force, but 20 kilograms of shark fin can have a value of more than £4,000, so it also identifies a huge tax evasion potential. It is therefore very welcome that the UK government has committed in the action plan to ban the import and export of shark fins to and from the UK. And the only clarification I would seek from the government today is a timeline for implementation. Therefore, I'd like to turn next to E-Petition 326261, entitled Ban the Exploitative Import of Young Puppies for Sale in the UK. The prayer of this petition states, and I quote, that plenty of dogs from UK breeders and rescues need homes. Transporting young pups long distances is often stressful before being sold for ridiculous prices to unsuspecting dog lovers. Government must adjust laws, ban this unethical activity on welfare grounds, and protect these poor animals as soon as possible. The recent tragic case of a puppy dying just 6 days after being delivered from Russia has exposed a completely legal but immoral route to market for pups spread hundreds of miles away and sold away from their mums. Who is actually inspecting these breeders and transportation conditions? Selling imported pups like this is cruel and appears to contradict the government's own advice to always physically see puppies interacting with their mothers in their place of birth, as with Lucy's Law in England. This petition closed with 128,549 signatures, including 217 from Carshalton and Wallington. And there has been significant interest in this petition. And I'm grateful to Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, the Kennel Club, Dogs Trust, Blue Cross, the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation, the All-Party Dog Advisory Welfare Group, and others for briefing me prior to today's debate. All organisations have spelled out almost in complete agreement about why action is desperately needed. Animals imported from overseas have often been subject to much lower animal welfare standards and even abuse, and the long journey can be physically and mentally draining on a puppy. It is also evident that the EU pet scheme is being completely abused, and there's not good enough enforcement at the UK border. Again, the UK government has taken action since responding to this petition in the form of the action plan, which has stated that it will increase the minimum age that dogs can be brought into the UK, which has been largely welcomed, as well as the commitment to reduce the number of dogs and cats that can be moved under pet travel rules. There are many common themes from all the organisations that have approached me for a briefing prior to today's debate, which I hope the Minister can address in her response. These include the need to reduce the number of dogs that can be moved under these pet travel rules down from 5 to 2 or 3, an increase in maximum sentencing, and much, much better enforcement at the border, including using trained animal professionals and having trained staff available 24/7 so that it avoids lapses at weekends and out of hours. Additionally, any information the Minister can provide on timelines would be very welcome indeed. But finally, I'd like to turn to E-Petition 574305, entitled Stop the Rising Number of Ear-Cropped Dogs in the UK. The prayer of this petition states, and I quote, that leading veterinary and welfare bodies are concerned by the alarming rise in ear-cropped dogs in the UK. Ear cropping is illegal in the UK and an unnecessary, painful mutilation with no welfare benefit. The practice involves cutting off the part of the dog ears that flap, often without anaesthesia or pain relief. The RSPCA states that there has been a 621% increase in reports of ear cropping from 2015 to 2020. We believe a rise in UK celebs sharing images of their ear-cropped dogs on social media is helping to fuel this. While illegal to crop in the UK, it is not illegal to sell ear-cropped dogs, import them from abroad, or take dogs overseas to be cropped. These loopholes act as a smokescreen for those illegally cropping in the UK. We call on the government to close these loopholes and end the trend in ear-cropped dogs for good. This petition is still open, and at the time of writing this speech has over 104,000 signatures, including 147 from Carshalton and Wallington. And again, I'm grateful to the petition creators for speaking to me last week about why they felt that this was important. Similar to shark finning, the practice of cropping a dog's ear is indeed illegal in the UK, but importing and exporting is keeping the practice alive. However, there is an added pressure here, as the petitioners have outlined, as there has been a rise in the number of celebrities and so-called social media influencers who have been buying ear-cropped dogs and parading them online. Whilst I'm sure some are looking to provide them a loving home, many are buying them for their aesthetics, otherwise known as the way they look. Now, I'm not going to waste time naming and shaming these celebrities, as they've all been well covered in press reports, but I would join with animal charities in urging them not to buy ear-cropped dogs or parade them around social media, which could lead others to buy them. We need to take the demand away, so I hope the Minister will join me in her reply in condemning this celebrity trend and urging them not to do so. There is no need to crop a dog's ear, and many who do so put the animal through this awful procedure without any sedation or pain relief. Again, I praise the government for bringing forward measures in the action plan in this area, which states it looks to prohibit the importation and non-commercial movement of dogs into Great Britain that have been subject to low welfare practices, such as ear cropping or tail docking, in line with domestic legislation on these practices. However, whilst the practice might be banned in the UK, UK-based companies are still offering do-it-yourself cropping kits for sales on online platforms such as Google or Amazon. So I wonder if the Minister could confirm what steps the UK government is also doing to tackle this. Could the Minister also confirm that this commitment to ban imports and non-commercial movement includes a ban on the private sale of ear-cropped dogs within the UK, regardless of whether the seller caused the dog's ears to be cropped in the first place? And finally, as with the other petitions, any news on timelines would be greatly appreciated. Overall, Mr. Mundell, the government should be commended for its action plan on animal welfare and in listening to the concerns of the petitioners that we are discussing today. I want to thank those who have signed each of these 3 petitions, who have demonstrated the power of the petition system in the UK, evidenced by the fact that all 3 have secured changes in policy. The big question coming out of today's debate must be when we can expect to see these measures brought before the House. However, I'd also like to add that where the UK is showing leadership, the lead petitioners I spoke to also spoke of how we cannot act alone. Whilst the UK may take this firm action, which I'm sure the Minister will further outline in her reply, overseas animals will still be subject to these practices unless we encourage others to follow our lead. So I hope the Minister will also touch on what we are doing to influence animal welfare standards around the world, taking advantage of hosting the G7 and our new trading relationships to ensure others can follow our example. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Colburn. The question is that this House has considered E-petitions 300535, 326261 and 574305 relating to the Government's action plan for animal welfare. I don't intend to impose a time limit at this stage, provided that members can stick to a self-disciplined time limit of 4 minutes. And I call Stephen Bonner.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Mundell. Can I congratulate the member for Carshalton and Wallington in bringing this important debate before us. Historically, the UK was the foremost leader when it came to animal welfare, and is the first island of nations in the world to implement legislation protecting animal rights. But today we have witnessed this Tory government turn its back on the opportunity to implement the very highest standards of animal welfare. The SNP has always been a steadfast commitment to initiating the steps that have strengthened animal welfare legislation, and will continue upon this progressive path in this new parliamentary term. Indeed, the Scottish Government has undoubtedly led the way in developing such policies that keep animal health and welfare at the forefront of any new legislation that comes before them. It has been especially heartening to see these decisions prompt debate and some considerable movement on crucial pieces of legislation across the other nations of the UK, such as banning the use of wild animals in circus, and an effective ban on the use of electric shock collars, paving the way for the rest of the UK to follow suit. Giving attention to the issues which are emblematic of a position that animals under our government's care deserve the very highest possible protections in future legislation. Since the pandemic, there has been an unprecedented demand for puppies, which has led to a devastating rise in the prevalence of abusive puppy farms. The rise in price due to demand has only further fuelled criminality. The introduction of Lucy's Law in Scotland has helped crack down somewhat on this scandalous trade, and means that puppies and kittens in Scotland can no longer be sold by third-party sellers, such as pet shops or commercial dealers, unless, of course, they have bred the animals themselves. Instead, anyone looking to buy or adopt a puppy under 6 months old must either deal directly with the breeder or the animal rehoming centre. The move has been warmly welcomed by animal charities such as the Kennel Club, who have described it as a crucial step in advancing animal welfare regulations. And I have seen the positive effects of Scotland's approach first-hand on a recent visit to the SSPCA Lanarkshire Rehoming Centre just last week. And I'd like to place on record, Mr Chairman, that the work carried out by that outstanding team that are based there is nothing short of incredible, and they are indeed a credit to their sector and, of course, a lifeblood to the animals that depend so much on their care. They indeed noted that the regulations introduced in Scotland are indeed far more effective, more fairer and far more straightforward than their English counterparts, simply by not repeating the mistakes made in the parallel regulations, which we already know has been embarrassingly ineffective in tackling poor breeding practices. This again proves that Scotland is leading the UK on this matter, and of course not for the first time, and again not only in this specific area. Indeed, the Scottish Government, unlike that operates from this place, creates animal welfare legislation based on independent scientific and ethical advice by the Animal Welfare Commission, a body of leading animal welfare experts and vets responsible for helping develop evidence-led recommendations on issues relating to animal welfare and sentience. Today, in the name of my constituents in Coatbridge, Christen and Bellshill, many of whom have signed these 3 petitions, I am further calling upon the Government today to prohibit the importation of shark fins, ban the exploitative import of young puppies, end the sale of electric shock training devices on pet collars, and stop the rising number of ear-cropped dogs being imported into the UK. This Government must work to ensure regulations are in place to protect the welfare of all animals. Although much of the legislation has been devolved, the Scottish Government are always willing to support strengthening animal welfare legislation within the UK and, of course, to achieve better standards internationally. And if the UK Government does need a precursor, it need look no further than to Edinburgh and to the Scottish Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Bonner. I now call Dr Neil Hudson, who's joining us virtually. Dr Hudson.
Thank you, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and follow the honourable member for Coatbridge, Christen and Bellshill. I welcome the session today debating important areas of animal welfare, and I declare a professional interest as a veterinary surgeon, and also declare that I'm a member of the Dogs Trust Parliamentary Puppy Smuggling Task Force. The shark fin petition I strongly support, and am reassured that the government has said it is keen to act to stop this cruel practice. Enlarging this theme as we move from World Environment Day to World Ocean Day, we must as a nation speak out and urge other countries to join in the conservation of species in all habitats. I welcome the government's approach in its action plan for animal welfare and the DEFRA Minister's responses to our letters and the EFRA Committee's inquiries into pet smuggling and the movement of animals across borders. I pay tribute to campaigners who have championed some of the causes we are addressing today in the puppy and ear cropping petitions, from fellow vet Mark Abraham, the BVA, Dogs Trust, Blue Cross, Battersea, RSPCA and the Foal Group, to name but a few. In recent times, and stimulated by the pandemic, we have seen increased demand for pets and heard of increased smuggling, importation, and a shift in movements from the pet travel scheme movement to the commercial Balai directive. We have also heard of increased reports of diseases in the UK, such as canine brucellosis, babesiosis, leishmaniasis, and echinococcus, some of which have zoonotic potential. In our EFRA committee hearings, we've heard harrowing accounts of the transport of puppies and heavily pregnant dogs in appalling conditions. Now we have left the EU, we have the opportunity to tighten up on legislation and border checks to put an end to this miserable plight for animals being transported by unscrupulous smugglers. We need to urgently raise the minimum age of entry for dogs and cats to 6 months and reinstate rabies titer checks and increasing the wait time post-rabies vaccination to 12 weeks. We also need to institute pre-import screening for pathogens such as Brucella canis and reinstitute the mandatory tick and tapeworm treatments before entry. This will not only protect the travelling animals, but also the UK pet population, and also mitigate against the risks of some diseases being transmitted to people. In addition, the number of pets per person currently set at 5 is too high and should be reduced to 2. In fact, it would be good if it was capped per vehicle, as we have heard reports of vehicles picking up foot passengers to increase the number of animals they can legally transport. The rules on transporting pregnant dogs and cats need to be tightened. Currently, it is not allowed in the last 10% of the pregnancy, but this is very difficult to adjudicate on, so the period should be increased to, say, 50% of the pregnancy. And we must not forget about cats and kittens in this debate. The scale of their smuggling is harder to ascertain, but we must be cognizant of this, that this is not just a canine problem. Ear cropping is a cruel, horrific, and unnecessary practice that is rightly illegal in the UK, but sadly there are increased reports of cropped dogs, with 6 in 10 small animal vets saying they have seen cropped dogs in the last year, begging the question of not only increased imports, but also the horrific concept of the cropping being done illicitly here in the UK. Celebrities and people in public life have a role to play here by not endorsing or promoting the ownership of cropped dogs. Also in culture and media, we need to be careful. One of my favorite films is Disney Pixar's Up, a touching and funny film coining the inspired phrase to describe a veterinary buster collar as the cone of shame. But take a closer look at one of the Dobermans in the cartoon film, and it looks like its ears have been cropped and splintered. These subtle images normalize something in our psyches that we should be calling out as unacceptable. Again, we should not forget the cat here. We should ban the import of dogs with cropped ears, but also the import of cats that have been declawed, another banned practice here in the UK. Finally, Chair, animal welfare unites us in humanity in our duty of care to animals, the fully sentient beings in our care. I welcome the government's direction of travel in this area, and I'm sure that we can work cross-party with government to do our bit to help sharks, dogs, and not forgetting the cats. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr Hudson. And I now call Dave Dugan.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell. It's a pleasure, of course, to serve under your chairmanship, and congratulations also to the member for Carshalton and Wallingford for securing this important debate. Today we discuss cross-party, the shame attached to various behaviours so grotesque it's truly challenging to admit that they're tolerated in any culture or in any community, much less elements of the communities that we live in and represent. And I'd like to thank the members of Angus constituency who have contacted me independently, and also those that have signed these important petitions. If I can first turn to the toe-curling barbarism of shark finning, Mr Mundell, and the catastrophe that this presents to unfold in a once a rare and infrequently consumed dish for the Chinese aristocracy, to a macabre edible trinket of no nutritional value that I understand must be comprehensively seasoned before it even has a taste. The global demand for which, from principally a burgeoning Chinese middle class, has created a totem for conspicuous consumption and ultimate status symbol. The resulting demand is literally insatiable. There will never be enough sharks to sate the demand, currently running at 73 million sharks annually. The strongest action must be taken if we are to reverse this growth and popularity of this most costly of dishes. Costly in every sense, Mr Mundell, not just $100 for a bowl of broth, and consign it as a guilty pleasure that it is, and ensure that over time it's consigned to history, and to do so as soon as possible. Now, the UK government has said that they will bring in legislation to ban the import and export of detached shark fins, but I wonder if the Minister might clarify if this is shark fins intact and dried, but also shark fin products, because if it isn't, then we risk supplanting one problem with just as grievous another. And this, Mr Mundell, being an issue of customs and enforcement at the UK border, it is of course reserved for the time being to constituents in Scotland to death threaten the UK government. But I'd like to be clear that the SNP government in Scotland will be supporting any prohibition on the import of detached shark fins and shark fin products to protect this majestic animal and apex predator from the unimaginable suffering of finning. Turning to puppy smuggling, I, my colleagues on the Select Committee have heard the most harrowing evidence that we took on puppy smuggling into the UK. Particularly horrifying was the evidence of pregnant bitches being seized and found to be pregnant prior to having had the opportunity to heal from their last caesarean section. This compounded by evidence that the gangs will grudgingly concede their pups at the border when seized, but will be very, very unhappy indeed to lose a breeding bitch. This indicates the terrible ordeal for pups and their mothers, with travelling huge distances in poor conditions, and the long-term health problems which will leave many a heartbroken family with a poorly bred pup which will never reach adulthood. The SNP government in Scotland pledges to modernise and update the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and will continue to adopt the highest possible animal welfare standards and protect their well-being. The Scottish Government will adopt new licensing requirements for breeding puppies and, importantly, also for kittens and infant rabbits, something that I don't believe at the moment, although the Minister may clarify this, DEFRA is planning to do, as well as the introduction of Lucy's Law, which will end third-party selling of dogs and cats in Scotland under the age of 6 months. On ear cropping, Mr Mundell, many of us in this room will be dog owners and dog lovers, and the notion of mutilating a puppy to reshape its ears into a more aggressive posture is beyond my ken, and I'm sure the vast majority of the public also. However, it is not currently prohibited to possess a dog with cropped ears, and as suggested by the Scottish SPCA, animals that have undergone this mutilation are being seen in greater numbers. These animals may have been cropped illegally in Scotland, elsewhere in the UK, or may have been imported, and we need to make sure that we work cross-party, cross-nation in the UK to adopt the best possible outcome for our animals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dugan. I call Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell. It's a pleasure to be back in Westminster Hall. This is the first time I've made a contribution in Westminster Hall since the start of the lockdown, in truth, and so it's even better that it's under your chairmanship, Mr Mundell, and I'm grateful to see you, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Angus as well. Mr Mundell, I know that we have 3 petitions brought together for this afternoon's debate, and I'm encouraged that in my constituency of Belfast East, 464 individuals have signed the 3 together, as a cumulative figure. But I do want to focus my remarks on puppy welfare, Mr Mundell, for the course of my 4 minutes. I think it is encouraging, and it has been mentioned, the progress on Lucy's Law, but as has been mentioned and will no doubt be repeated throughout the course of this debate, there are loopholes. There are difficulties with the application of the law, and primarily in frustrating the importation of illegally farmed puppies from outside of the United Kingdom. I think England did lead the way last year with the introduction. Scotland shortly followed thereafter. Wales will have introduction of legislation in September this year. And in Northern Ireland, Mark Abraham was mentioned. Mark has been keenly involved in the campaigning to introduce Lucy's Law in Northern Ireland. My colleague from East Belfast, party colleague Robin Newton MLA, is advancing that legislation, and not a moment too soon. In looking at contributions on this issue over the last number of years, Mr Mundell, I'm minded that my colleague behind me, the Honourable Member for Strangford, noted that his wife is a volunteer of a CC Animal Sanctuary in his constituency. It's a wonderful charity, and 6 years ago, just prior to my election to this place, I launched our party's animal welfare policy document in their facility in Newton Norwich. And we had ambitious plans, and I think we still do, to increase the sentencing for animal welfare, but I think there's a challenge for animal cruelty, but there is a challenge here to the Minister. So much of this debate is what's happening in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England, as if they are separate entities. There's a much greater need, I think, for collaboration across the 4 nations, and I don't think the Minister will balk to that notion. I just think there needs to be greater focus on it. One issue that comes up time and time again is the lack of a register of those banned from holding animals. Sentencing is one thing. We want to see an increase of penalties, but with no acute register where people can read across and make sure and check if somebody has been banned from holding animals, we need that register to preclude them from looking after animals again. Shortly after my election in 2015, I remember working with the then member for Dumfries and Galloway, Richard Arkless, on puppy smuggling. My constituency in East Belfast straddles Belfast Lough, and we all know there's a good ferry connection from there over to Scotland. And here we are 6 years later, still talking about the same issue. I see the Honourable Lady Freese Kilbride will be talking on this issue later as the SNP spokesperson, and I do think there is an onus on us from Northern Ireland and Scotland to collaborate in a much greater and impactful fashion. Mr Mundell, was just 6 years ago that the figures were 100,000 puppies being brought into this country from illegal farms. 40% of those were coming from the Republic of Ireland, 30% coming from illegal farms in Romania, Hungary, Poland and Lithuania. Those numbers have greatly increased. In the intervening period, those numbers have increased dramatically. I think of a constituency worker in my own team in East Belfast who bought a wonderful Cocker Spaniel called Walter just a year ago. At £450, he thought it was a bargain. And Walter, after £1,200 worth of vet bills, had to be put down after 6 months because of total organ failure. And I think all of us who bring an animal into our home know how quickly it becomes a loved one, a huge part of the family. And whenever you're in such a situation like that, it pulls at our hearts. We approach this issue, I approach this issue as an animal lover, Mr. Mundell. And so I do think the challenge, not just about incorporating and strengthening the law that's already there, but it's to increase collaboration across the 4 parts of this United Kingdom so that we don't see repeat after repeat of Walter, of Mr. Chai and of Lucy herself.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I now call Neil Parish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. It's also a pleasure to follow the member for Belfast East, who raises a really very good point about the diseased animals that you're likely to buy and the great cost and heartache to people when you have to either actually have them put down. And it really is essential that we do more about this. I'm also happy to follow the member for Angus, who is a great member of the Select Committee, and also the member for Penrith and the Borders, who of course brings his veterinary experience to the Select Committee. So it is, I very much support these petitions that have come through. And on the shark finning, can I say to the Minister, in all seriousness, I think that we really do have to take up with the European Union as far as shark finning is concerned, because I won't name the particular countries that are interested in shark finning in particular. They're sort of well south of Europe, but I don't need to sort of name them. And that is where, you know, we really do need to act to stop this happening, because of course the trouble is with shark fins, they are very valuable, and so therefore, you know, this practice must be stopped. So as far as puppies are concerned, I very much endorse what every member has been saying. And I think also what I'm going to sort of concentrate on is that we've had evidence from the committee, oral evidence on pet smuggling from the veterinary directors of Dogs Trust, which is Dr. Jennifer Maher from the University of South Wales, and Danielle Don Santos, the senior vice president of the British Veterinary Association, as well as RSPCA and Dogs Trust and others. So it is key that we act on this, because I think we're putting together, and I congratulate the government and I congratulate the minister on putting together some very good legislation. But I think the biggest issue of all is enforcing that legislation. I also think Border Force needs to have many more staff and many more trained staff, so that as puppies come through, they can work out whether they're 15 weeks old or not, and all of these things have to be done. Also, they have to be there late at night, early in the morning. They have to be there at weekends. Not perhaps every weekend, not perhaps every night, but they need to come and go, so that, you know, those that are smuggling puppies through illegally will be caught. Because, you know, you are talking probably now between £2,000 and £3,000 per puppy. So therefore it doesn't take you too much arithmetic to work out that if you actually smuggle quite a number of puppies through, it is very lucrative. And of course, up until now, the sentencing has been very light. Now we are actually, you know, welcoming the further sentencing of up to 5 years, but, you know, we have got to make sure, and I think sometimes puppy smuggling doesn't always fall within the animal welfare legislation either. So absolutely key to get on with this and make sure that we enforce it properly. I'm also going to say something which perhaps is slightly more controversial, but we in this country probably need about 800,000 puppies a year. I think we talk about 10,000 puppies, average age of about 12 years, so if you do the arithmetic, you probably need between 700,000 and 800,000 puppies. We don't breed that number, Mr. Mundell, and this is a problem. Now, I don't want to go into vast puppy farming, but I think somehow or other the government needs to encourage substantial breeding of dogs in a humane way. And it's not easy, because you don't want to overbreed from any bitches. You know, you've got lots of things have to be carefully done. But I rather fear if we don't actually do something about the number of puppies that are needed, then the sheer price of them and the sheer temptation to smuggle will remain. And so therefore, you know, I would say to the Minister, in all seriousness, I think I would very much consider this. So I think I'm not going to really raise all the points that every other member has made, because I think the action plan, the minimum of 15 weeks, reduce it to two puppies, I believe, that can come in legitimately, because I don't believe actually many people go out and actually buy 5 puppies for their own use, and so therefore they're coming back legitimately, if you like, through a system that's been abused. So lots of things we can do, lots of things, the tail cropping and all the ears and everything, absolutely abhorrent. Let's do our best to stamp it out. So I think, again, we are all, I think, in all parties on this, and I think that's one thing I enjoy with chairing the Select Committee. You can bring all parties together, and I'm sure the Minister would congratulate all parties on working on this. So I don't think it's a party political issue, but I will sort of finish where I started, and that is we can have all the best rules in the world, Mr Mundell, but if we don't enforce them, it won't work. We've also got chipping and microchipping, all of these things, but very often when you take them to the vet, a lot of these puppies that are found, most of the microchips are largely fictitious and what the information is on them. They're not kept up to date. When people genuinely sell dogs, they should be kept up to date anyway, and then you start to pick up those that are illegally traded, because they are very clever, these gangs, and we must not sort of underestimate them, and there is big money to be made. And like I said, let's all work together to try and stamp this out, but it's a case of government working across all departments. It's not just DEFRA, and I'm sure the Minister would agree with me on that. So thank you very much, Mr Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Parish. Let's all try and work together to stick to the 4-minute speaking, and I now call Sir David Amos.
This is one of those glorious occasions, Mr Mundell, when you have taken me off guard. I hadn't realised there had been a number of withdrawals from the debate, so obviously there is a bonus here, but it's one of those wonderful occasions when the House can agree on something, and that is all members of Parliament are against cruelty to animals. That isn't rocket science, but of course some of us have been saying these things in Parliament a little longer than others, and for me it is an enormous joy that there are so many members of Parliament who have prioritised this to the top of their agenda for all sorts of reasons. I should say, Mr Mundell, that my honourable friend for Wallington and Carshalton has introduced the debate so effectively, there's precious little left to say, really. But I very much support him. I very much support him in what he said, although I am going to say, Mr Mundell, that on the top of my list of animals which are my favourites, it wouldn't be sharks. Now, we do know that there was a film about sharks, which of course did a great deal of damage, but I have kept sharks in tropical fish tanks, but they're not quite like the ones that we see in the film. I believe, Mr Mundell, now that we have left the European Union, I do hope that we will be able to drag other countries up to, or some other countries, up to our already high standards. And we continue to improve standards of animal welfare in this country. So I'm delighted, if I say to my honourable friend the Minister, who will be yet again replying to this debate, I am very, very pleased with the progress that is being made in terms of animal welfare. And I was delighted that my 10-minute raw bill on banning farrowing crates be recognised in the government's action plan. And I do urge the government again to ban these cruel and unnecessary cages for sows. Very, very cruel. I know it might upset some of the farming community, but there is no reason to use these crates. 20 years ago, we banned shark finning, yet shark fins are still being traded today. As a country with strong marine conservation, we must ban the import and export of shark fins, as other colleagues have said, and press for stronger action against unsustainable fishing practices. Now, tomorrow, Mr. Mundell, is World Oceans Day. I don't know if we've got a badge to wear celebrating that, but it is World Oceans Day, and it is very apt that we are bringing the attention to the House the plight of sharks and pushing for harsher financial punishments to act as deterrents for the mutilation of one of these perhaps scary if you go towards them, but if you leave them alone, they're fine. They are wonderful creatures. We've already heard in the opening speech about a puppy who was just 4 months old and died after being transported from the Soviet Union to the United Kingdom. But this is just one example of the many puppies imported for sale. And I have to say, Mr. Mundell, all puppies are cute. We love puppies. But of course, as we tell our children and grandchildren, though I don't have any grandchildren yet, they grow up. And as they grow up, they develop personalities in a different way. And there is an enormous responsibility in owning a dog. It's not just they're cute while they're a puppy, and I do think there should be much more careful thought into dog ownership generally. And yes, during the 18 months that the pandemic has been with us, lots of people found great comfort from owning an animal. I understand all of that, but talking to so many of the animal welfare groups, it is rather heartbreaking the number of these dogs which have been returned to these organisations. And this particular puppy that I'm referring to suffered harsh conditions, cruel conditions before dying. Many importers exploit a loophole in Lucy's law by legally bringing in 5 puppies at a time in the United Kingdom and selling them directly to the buyer for a larger profit. The number of dogs that can be legally brought into the country should, I believe, be reduced to 2 per vehicle to stop these criminals importing on the mass scale that they are currently doing at the moment. I would very much like our government to increase the minimum import age for dogs to 6 months and to restrict the ability of unscrupulous traders to import heavily pregnant dogs. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. Even though we are talking about dogs today, we must never forget about the very young farm animals who also endure long journeys for export that similarly need conditions improving. And I do feel very, very strongly about the live export of animals. I won't go into the details of ear cropping, other colleagues have mentioned it, but it is preventable and it is painful and is often performed without any sort of pain relief. I mean, how would we all like our ears to be cropped? Despite it being illegal, the RSPCA stated that there was a 621% increase in reports of ear cropping from 2015 to today. It is, however, not illegal to sell ear crop dogs, import them from abroad or take dogs abroad to be cropped. As a patron of the wonderful Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation, I encourage the government, which I support, to introduce further steps to ensure the transport of dogs with cropped ears for sale in the United Kingdom cannot take place and address this loophole. At the border, there should be more thorough and visual checks of dogs and their importation methods. We must, however, be careful to not affect the importation of rescue dogs. Wonderful, wonderful stories about rescue dogs, or any dogs bred by responsible breeders who follow high animal welfare standards. In conclusion, Mr. Mundell, I welcome the government's intention to introduce 3 new bills to continue to improve animal welfare. The Animal Welfare Sentience Bill, the Kept Animals Bill, and the Animals Abroad Bill. All of those measures I really do welcome, and again I hope the House will come together, support those measures and get them quickly onto the statute book. A timeline and urgent delivery on the government's action plan on animal welfare is much needed. I urge people to buy pets from trusted sellers and to follow the Animal Welfare Foundation and RSPCA puppy contract to ensure that dogs are in good health when they are purchased.
Thank you. I now call Patricia Gibson.
Mr Chair, I'm delighted to participate in this debate, and I have in the past, as have others, spoke many times about the unscrupulous elements who exploitatively import puppies in horrific conditions. So today I wish to focus on the issue of ear cropping of dogs and the need to ban the importation of shark fins. Now, the issue of ear cropping in dogs is vile, as we've heard, mutilating dogs' ears for so-called aesthetic reasons. Illegal, of course, across the UK and across the EU, but it continues to be a challenge. Dogs which have their ears cropped undergo an incredibly painful procedure, typically with no pain relief, and are vulnerable to infection as a result. The practice also has the potential to influence a dog's behaviour, welfare and quality of life, since dogs use their ears to communicate. Therefore, ear cropping can impact on a dog's relationships with other dogs and people. The RSPCA, as we have heard, has reported a 621% increase in the number of cases between 2015 and 2019. This is truly shocking, and loopholes in current legislation mean that it is legal to sell ear-cropped dogs and to import dogs with cropped ears from abroad. And these loopholes act as a smokescreen for those who illegally crop dogs' ears inside the UK. Therefore, if the ban on ear cropping within the UK is to truly safeguard dogs, as is the intention, then banning the importation of dogs with cropped ears into the UK is vital. This would allow a much more robust enforcement action to be taken against those cropping dogs' ears in the UK. In addition, the law should also make clear that arranging to take a dog abroad for the purposes of cropping is also an offence. And I know the Scottish Government is looking very seriously at this, but work on this would most effectively be carried out by a coordinated set of actions across the UK, so I'm sure the Minister will seek to liaise with the Scottish Government on that important issue. Now, the petition on the importation of shark fins is also very important. The shark population is declining rapidly on a global scale because humans have now replaced sharks as the ocean's top predators. The shark population is being severely impacted by the horrific practice of shark finning, which is the process of slicing off a shark's fin and discarding the rest of the still living animal into the ocean where, unable to swim, it sinks to the bottom and dies a slow and painful death. Now, shark fins are considered a real prize for some fishermen because they have a high monetary and cultural value. Now, whilst conservation, advocacy and education has cut China's consumption of shark fin soup by 80% since 2011, this sadly has been offset by a rise in the consumption of this dish in places such as Thailand, Vietnam and Indonesia. So in order to protect the shark as a species, due to the terrible cruelty it inflicts on the sharks and due to the vital role sharks play in our ocean ecosystem health, I urge the Minister to do all she can to drive progress on banning the importation of shark fins following the Government's recent announcement on the global shark fin trade only last month. It's important that action proceeds on this with all due haste, sending a clear signal that we will have no truck with such a cruel and shocking practice. So I shall conclude my remarks there, Mr Chair, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response.
Thank you, Ms Gibson, and particularly for sticking to time, and I hope James Daly, who I'm going to call next, will follow your example.
Challenge for you, Mr Mundell. It's a pleasure, Mr Mundell, to serve under your chairmanship, and I, of course, endorse what all colleagues have spoken about. I intend to concentrate my remarks on E-Petition 574305 regarding ear cropping of dogs in the UK, which is an abhorrent practice. In recognition that there is no medical justification for ear cropping, the procedure itself has been banned in the UK for over 100 years and is currently covered by Section 5 of the Animal Welfare Act 2006 as an illegal mutilation. And I'm incredibly grateful to Pennine vets in my constituency for briefing me on this very important issue. The current position in the UK is that whilst it is illegal to conduct this mutilation, it is not illegal to import a dog with cropped ears. This has resulted in several issues. The first being that owners and breeders can send their puppies abroad to be cropped and then return to the UK, only to claim that the dog is a legal import. This quite frequently involves not only transporting a puppy that is too young for travel, but also that means that if the cropping is done in a country where cropping is also illegal, the enforcement agencies in that country are not able to bring any prosecutions as the evidence, i.e. the cropped puppy, has left their jurisdiction. The second issue is that the ability to import crop dogs has also been relied upon by pro-croppers to hide a very dark backstreet practice, where breeders or owners are undertaking illegal DIY cropping, quite frequently with no medical knowledge or training, rudimentary equipment, no anaesthetic and no post-operative pain relief for the dogs. The ability to import crop dogs also extends to rescue dogs. It is imperative that genuine rescue dogs are protected and not demonised due to the abuse they have suffered. The pain and suffering caused to the dogs does not cease post-procedure. One of the breeds frequently cropped is a Doberman, a large and noble breed. For Doberman puppies, ear cropping can mean not only the severance of a significant part of their ear flap, but also months of splinting and or taping to encourage the remaining ear to stand erect. This is not a guaranteed result. It can and does fail, leaving the dog either put through further surgery to try to obtain the original desired look, or with one ear erect and one ear flapping. Wound infections are also not uncommon. It is utterly abhorrent, and I fully endorse and support the government for including this within the action plan for animal welfare. I have to finish, Mr Mundell, by echoing something that my friend from Penrith and the Border said, not forgetting the cats. On numerous occasions I've stood with my honourable friend, the very best minister, and talked about Gizmo's Law. Gizmo's Law is something that is not included, and I stand to be corrected, in the plan for animal welfare. It is an animal welfare issue that is incredibly serious and is very, very important to people in my constituency, and I know that other colleagues, including the Shadow Minister, has had meetings with Helder Abrahams, a force of nature, to try and bring this important legislation, this important law into statute. I'm very grateful that the government adopted Tuck's Law, which was part of a private member's bill that I brought, and I hope that Gizmo's Law is going to follow very shortly. Thank you, Mr Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Daly, and I now call Alex Davies-Jones.
Diolch, Chair, and I'm grateful to follow the member for Bury North, and I echo his comments regarding Gizmo's Law being brought in as soon as possible. And I'm also grateful to be called to speak in this debate this afternoon on a topic close to so many of our hearts, and one that I have spoken about in this place at length before. The welfare of animals, big and small, has undeniably taken a hit as a consequence of the pandemic, but it is our duty and moral obligation to protect animals from harm, and like many others, I have fears that the government's action plan for animal welfare does not stretch far enough. Now, worryingly, residents in my area across Pontypridd constituency topped the signature count for the petition focused around the worrying rise in ear cropping of dogs, so that is where I will focus my comments today, Chair. Let us be clear. Ear cropping is a barbaric and illegal practice which is completely unnecessary and brings no welfare benefit to dogs. There are some fantastic charities out there who are leading the way on tackling this issue, none more so than Hope Rescue, who are a dog rescue charity based in my good friend and neighbour, the Honourable Member for Ogmore's constituency. Hope Rescue do genuinely brilliant work and are a proud formal partner of the Flop Not Crop campaign, which is a collaboration led by the Focus on Animal Law Group and the British Veterinary Association. The strength of feeling when it comes to ear cropping is particularly clear in South Wales, and Hope Rescue are currently caring for 8 micro-bully puppies seized from a breeder. Of the 8, 6 have had their ears cropped. It is all very well to outlaw these cruel practices, but it is clear that in the case of ear cropping, the law is doing nothing to protect dogs who are at risk. As others have mentioned, while it is illegal to crop in the UK, it is not illegal to sell ear cropped dogs, import them from abroad, or take dogs abroad to be cropped. These loopholes act as a smokescreen for these illegally cropping in the UK, and sadly the coronavirus pandemic and the overall increase in demand for dogs and puppies has sadly seen an increase in demand for dogs with cropped ears. It is also utterly shocking that over the past 5 years, the RSPCA have reported a 621% increase in reports of dogs with cropped ears, and clearly this is something that charities on the ground are seeing and are having to cope with too. In the last few weeks alone, Hope Rescue have reported a number of breeders across South Wales to both the police and relevant local authorities, but ultimately the severe delays in the court system is having a major impact, and sadly the ability to create meaningful change is very limited. It is absolutely vital that when considering issues on animal welfare, including those covered by the petitions we are debating today, that we also consider the knock-on and long-term problems that animals may face in years to come too. For puppies who have been the target of year cropping, they have also often been subject to poor breeding techniques which consequently impact their overall health and welfare as well. Put simply, the Government's action plan for animal welfare in its current form just does not go far enough to protect animals both now and in years to come. Part of the conversation, if we are truly to get a grip on tackling the abuse of animals, is to improve law enforcement practices. And while I welcome the recent passing of the Animal Welfare Sentencing Bill, tougher prison sentences for animal cruelty offences will do little to change the situation on the ground and are unlikely to lead to meaningful and much-needed change for animals suffering today. I urge the Minister to take my concerns and the concerns of colleagues across the political divide forward in her conversations with colleagues in the Home Office. The Government have the opportunity to improve practices but are dragging their heels when it comes to year cropping. I truly hope that today's debate will clarify to the Minister that urgent action is required, and it is required now. Diolch, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I now call Jim Shannon. And Mr Shannon, if you stick to 4 minutes, then our Minister and spokespersons will have plenty of time to contribute.
Well, Ms Mandel, thank you for that. And it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady for Pontypridd and everyone else who has spoken. Thank the member for Carshalton and Wellington for presenting the case. As the Honourable Member who's just left for East Belfast referred to, my wife was a dedicated volunteer for the CC Animal Sanctuary for many years. Indeed, many of our animals in our home are ones who have been rescued, and they now rule the roost in the house. My comments will focus largely on the puppy issue of this debate, and the facts are clear. There's been an absolute massive increase in the calls for puppies during the pandemic. People spending time at home have realised that a wee dog may be something that can complete their family, and that is lovely, and it should be the case. However, my wife has highlighted to me that often in peaks like these, there will be a devastating peak of abandoned dogs when owners realise the huge responsibility that comes with that cute little puppy, as a member for South End West referred to as well. Dogs are a lot of work, and in my opinion, as one who has had dogs all my life, they're worth every second of it. The fact is, dogs will always love you, they'll always wag their tail, and the Springer Spaniel that we have on him was a dog that came from I think probably a home where it was abused. Was certainly nervous and unsure. Now it's confident, and really it's now my hunting dog and also my guard dog as well. I first realised the scale of the problem. One of my staff members told me she'd been approached during lockdown, went out on a walk with a 2-year-old dachshund by a man who offered to buy the dog. She laughed it off by saying she would rather sell her husband before she would sell the dog. There's a thought for you now. My goodness me, you know. I hope thank you it wasn't my side. Just saying it wasn't my wife that said that. Okay. So it might have been my wife. I just didn't hear her, you know. But there you are. And here's the story. She was met with a stern face, saying, "Listen, I will give you £1,000. I can't source dachshunds anywhere." She paid £550 for the dog 2 years ago from a local lady who invited her into her home. When she saw the mum and dad, she saw the papers and was happy that all was well. That's the way it should be done. This type of dog is now listed at over 2,000. Little wonder she was approached. We are now seeing people who are capitalise on the epidemic, isolation and loneliness, and when there's a need, the unscrupulous will do whatever it takes to solve it. Therefore, despite Lucy's law, the unscrupulous are exploiting loopholes in order to exploit animals and make their quick buck. The problem is that these animals are not checked to the rigorous standards, and the results can be dire. Health risks to both pups and unsuspecting new owners. Families in the UK include the infectious diseases, and we have to be aware of it. The parvovirus, the E. coli, brucellosis, parasitic infestations of ticks, tapeworms, rabies from countries where it's endemic. Those are things that we can't ignore. These are serious issues, and indeed I read an article recently outlining the increasing fear of disease which cross the human-animal divide. So in some cases they will have an impact upon human beings as well. Puppies must presently be at least 15 weeks old to enter the UK legally. It's virtually impossible to accurately age a 15-week-old puppy by teeth or parents alone. Documents including certification and animal passports are commonly forged, and microchip numbers can be falsified, thus comprising both traceability and accountability. I finish with this, Mr. Mundell. The suggestion made that an import age must be raised to 6 months, and I understand that some people may be less inclined to get a dog that may be older and harder to train, but at the same time, I've had many older dogs over the years, and they can testify that a gentle hand and love can teach any old dog the basics. 6 months may affect the cute factor of the dog you're buying, but it certainly would affect the training. So can the Minister confirm, and I want to ask a question, in conclusion, the Republic of Ireland is seen as a place where dogs and puppy farming and trafficking can happen from the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland to the UK and vice versa. So I just want to know what discussions has the Minister had with the Republic of Ireland to ensure that the law has been used quite across the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland to ensure that it happens. So I can see the loopholes that exist. We must work to close these as soon as possible and to prevent abuse of the system, which translates to abuse of animals and can pose a danger to families throughout this UK. I think that was just about 4 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Shannon. I'm now going to call Dr. Lisa Cameron, followed by Luke Pollard and the Minister. And if they could each stick to about 9 minutes, that will allow Mr. Colburn some moments to conclude the debate. Dr. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mundell. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today in such an important petitions debate. Can I add my thanks to all those who have spoken in today's debate, to the people of the United Kingdom who have signed petitions of the utmost importance on dog welfare and shark welfare, and to the Right Honourable Gentleman for Cushelton and Wallington for his dedicated work on issues of animal welfare and for leading on today's debate. I also thank the numerous animal welfare charities, organisations and experts who have been in touch, including the Kennel Club, Dogs Trust, RSPCA, SSPCA, Blue Cross, Battersea, Cariad, Mark Abraham, League Against Cruel Sports, just to name a few. And I must declare an interest myself as the owner of Rossi, the rescue French bulldog, who came fourth in the Westminster Dog of the Year a few years ago, and we're very proud of Rossi, but also in my capacity as chair of the all-party parliamentary dog welfare group at Westminster, and we've been championing cross-party Lucy's Law, as you know, for so long, and it's had such success across the United Kingdom. We're very proud of that, but today's debate shows that there is much more work to be done and that we can work together cross-party to ensure that that happens. The contributions from honourable members has been absolutely excellent, and I'd like to highlight the honourable members for Coatbridge, North Ayrshire and Arran and Angus, who proudly raised the work of our Scottish Government on animal welfare and the work that will be taken forthcoming on these issues in the Scottish Parliament over the next 5 years. I was also particularly delighted to hear from the experience of the honourable member for Prentis, who is himself a veterinary surgeon, and the honourable member for Belfast East, who spoke passionately about puppy welfare, the honourable member for Strangford, who speaks in so many of these debates, and whose wife works on the front line of puppy welfare, so speaking with great family expertise in today's debate, and the honourable member for Tiverton and Honiton, who works endlessly on animal welfare issues in the Select Committee and is always attending these debates, such a dedicated individual to animal welfare in our House of Commons. The honourable member for Southend West, who I couldn't believe my ears when I thought I heard he said he was a keen shark keeper, although I was glad it was little tropical tank sharks that he mentioned to clarify that matter. And once again, he is assiduous in speaking on animal welfare across the House and has achieved so much in the terms that he has served to raise and take forward these matters. And the honourable member for Bury North and the honourable member for Pontypridd, who gave absolutely detailed rationales against cropping dogs' ears and the need for government action, particularly in relation to the petition in that aspect of animal welfare legislation. In line with others who have spoken, I would like to press government on its commitment to increase the minimum age that dogs can be non-commercially moved or commercially imported, and I'd like to record my support for the recommendation of the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission and over 128,000 members of the public across the UK who signed the petition calling for government to increase the age at which puppies can be imported to the UK from the present age of 15 weeks to 6 months. Under present restrictions, it's incredibly difficult to identify whether a puppy is 15 weeks by appearance alone, and therefore almost impossible to effectively enforce current legislation, with documentation attesting to this fact, such as pet passports, easily forged or falsified. So much more must be done. Scientific evidence is also growing that a single rabies vaccination at 12 weeks is largely ineffective for puppies, meaning that the pups imported from countries where rabies is endemic currently poses a significant public health risk of rabies transmission amongst humans and dogs in the UK. There's also increasing evidence collected by Dogs Trust, as we've heard already, that suggests that puppies are bred in absolutely horrific conditions, enduring journey times, often of over 20 hours, with little food or water in order to be sold in the UK. The mental and physical health risks associated with travel and their unscrupulous low welfare breeding has not only led to the tragic deaths that have been discussed in today's debate in transit, but also the potential transmission of infectious diseases, some of them zoonotic, including parvovirus, E. coli, brucellosis, and parasitic infestations of ticks and tapeworms, so extremely serious medical conditions. Lucy's Law, that many of us have worked so hard upon across party during the last parliamentary term, has gone some way to improving the welfare of pups and their mums, but there remains the loophole, and more must be done. The loophole continues to allow breeders to sell puppies that have not been born in licensed, inspected breeding premises, and this absolutely flies in the face of the government's own advice to always see puppy interacting with the mum in the place that they were born. So by introducing a ban on the importation of puppies younger than 6 months, government would not only protect young puppies from arduous travel and spread of potentially fatal diseases, but would also be introducing a far more robust system where a puppy's age can now be verified by visual appearance due to their adult teeth being visible, and where puppies would be travelling after a much more effective full course of 2 rabies vaccinations. I'd also like to press government on its commitment, its action plan prohibiting importation of dogs to the UK being subject to low practices such as ear cropping or tail
Hear you,
docking.
Dr. Cameron.
Sorry?
Slightly struggled to hear you, Dr. Cameron, so perhaps if you could repeat the previous sentence, I think that would...
Thank you, Mr. Mundell. Thank you for pointing that out. I was also wanting to press government on its commitment made in the action plan to prohibiting the importation of dogs into the UK, subject to the low welfare practices, including ear cropping and tail docking. Battersley Dogs and Cats Home has documented a 200% increase in the number of dogs with cropped ears coming through its gates since 2016, which is absolutely startling, and the RSPCA reporting a 621% increase in instances of dog cropping of ears in the last 6 years. This ear cropping phenomena is often carried out in a crude and amateurish manner with no pain relief, causing immense amounts of pain and trauma to young puppies at a crucial stage in their development and socialisation. And until recently, DIY cropping packages, including scalpels, blades and scissors, could be purchased online for £30. And this phenomenon seems to be fuelled disturbingly by a growing number of celebrities posing on social media with cropped ear pets. So this really must be addressed. And finally, I also echo calls from honourable members for government to act in relation to the import of shark fins. It's been covered at length by other honourable members. And once again, there appears to be broad agreement across party. This is something not only the public wish, but also animal welfare organisations agree on, and the government must now act on. Thank you to absolutely everyone who has contributed to what has been an excellent debate, and importantly to my own constituents across East Ryde, Straven and Les Mahagel who have signed this petition for today's debates in their droves. I look forward to hearing the Minister's comments and to working cross-party in the future to take these issues forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Mundell.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. Shadow Minister Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Mundell, and thank you to all the honourable members who have spoken in this debate. This has been a good debate, and I'd like to thank in particular the member for Carshalton and Wallington, who stole so much of everyone else's speeches by being so comprehensive at the start in his introduction, but I think he was also very good in pulling out the reasons from the individual petitioners as to why they were bringing forward these petitions. What was that injustice that they felt so compelled to petition Parliament to get a debate on? And I would like to thank him for those, and also thank the petitioners and all those who've signed these petitions that have made a really big difference, including the nearly 1,500 people from Plymouth who have also added their names to this one as well. It feels like we have been here before, though, Mr Mundell, and it was in fact in this room where we had an evidence session for the Ivory Act, the Ivory Bill, that's seeking to ban the sale of elephant ivory. That passed onto the statute books in 2018, and not a single provision of that bill has been put into force by the government so far. So we must be really careful of governments or political parties using animal welfare as a reason to put stuff on the legislation books, but not then enacting it. And I fear that there is a risk here, because in our hurry to pat ourselves on the back, to cite our cross-party passion for animal welfare, I think there is a risk that we let the government off the hook in what comes after. And that's why some of the contributions from members have been so powerful. I think the member for Tiverton and Honiton, who I want to preserve for many, many decades to come, because he articulates it so very, very well, and I don't want anything to happen to him, and I hope he fares well in the boundary changes. But I think when he talks about the need for proper enforcement, he actually speaks really powerfully, because if we are to make the case for animal welfare law, we must also make the case for it to be properly enforced. The Wildlife Crime Unit being a great example of something that is absolutely essential and completely underfunded. And so it's an example of how we need to make sure the words in the Animal Welfare Action Plan, which I think are welcome words, a step forwards, lots borrowed from the Animal Welfare Manifesto that my party stood on the last election, which is good because, frankly, I want to see the change more than I want to see a party rosette attached to it. But we do need to make sure it's properly enforced as well. The honourable members in this debate have made a number of really good contributions in relation to shark finning, and the figures are utterly staggering. The member for Southend will need a much bigger tank if he was to rescue the 100 million or so sharks that are killed each year. And although this debate has focused on shark fins, we should also be aware that it's not shark fin soup alone that's responsible for the decimation of the shark populations. Greenpeace estimate a 50% decline in the last 30 years in sharks. It's also shark meat. It's also illegal fishing practices. It's also the penetration of illegal and criminal fishing activities that are contributing to this. So when the member for Angus said in his remarks to the question about whether it should be banning all shark fin products, I think it is important that we look at this, because the wording of the action plan might be good on shark fins, but not necessarily shark fin products. And I think that is one of those areas, a loophole, that we must not be driving huge amounts of dead shark through to make sure this works. Just as the Ivory Act only banned elephant ivory, even if it was enforced, rhino ivory is not included. So let's make sure that when we are taking the time to legislate, that we do so in a way that is comprehensive about this. The Shark Trust, a fantastic organisation based in Plymouth, that operates globally, said it is unlikely you'll encounter responsibly sourced shark fin soup. So shark fin soup should probably be avoided. And that is a message that we need to send, because this is a new era we're going into, where China will be more dominant, and the practices of the Chinese government, the state-sponsored practices of illegal fishing and fishing activities around the world, is more than just about a welfare matter, it's a matter of geopolitics. So we must be careful about how we have this debate, careful how we encourage others to come with us in relation to this. But we do need to make sure that when we're talking about the illegal trade in shark fins, we also talk about the illegal trade in people that is so often accompanies this, because it's not just the massacre of 100 million sharks every single year that we're talking about. It's in many cases the illegal slavery, it's the oppressive conditions, it's the overfishing that must go along with this as well. That's why when we look at shark fins, it needs to be a comprehensive strategy, not just a tactic thrown to deal with the pressure from well-meaning and good vociferous lobbying from our constituents. So it needs to be broader than what we've seen here in relation to this. When it comes to dog ear cropping, I think we've heard some enormously passionate and heartfelt speeches from colleagues here. I think the member for North Ayrshire and Arran spoke really passionately about the effects of it, as did my honourable friend from Pontypridd, who is a real animal welfare champion on this. I think when we're talking about this, let's just remember what happens to a single dog when their ears are cropped. Let's remember the risk to that animal from infection. Let's remember the practice, the person who does it on a regular basis, the owner who allows that to happen, the person who turns a blind eye to the transit of that animal, the person purchasing an animal who turns a blind eye. But as was mentioned, I think very passionately about the influencers that do this, let's also call out those people who put an image of a cropped dog on their Instagram or their TikTok to get likes, to get shares, to get followers, ignoring the pain that comes with that dog. And so let's properly call out those influencers. And let's make sure also that in the online harms paper action that's going from DCMS, that animal welfare is properly included. The Minister will know I feel strongly about this, and I encourage her to speak to colleagues in DCMS regularly about how the online world is driving poor animal behaviour. But actually that is something that needs to be adjusted as a part of responsibility for those social media companies at the same time. Now, I think we have a leaky law when it comes to this, and it is poorly enforced when it comes to dog ear cropping. The 621% increase in reports of ear cropping since 2015 that was referenced by so many members, including the member for Southend West, I think is something that should shock us. But actually, it should only shock us if we haven't been paying attention to what has been a trend growing and growing and growing over many years. That's why we need proper action in relation to this. That's why we need a law that is not only tighter, but also one that is properly enforced. Because we know that there is a real boom in relation to dog ear cropping. A boom for a criminal activity which is disgusting. So the message on a cross-party basis that I'm certain the Minister will echo when she gets to her feet is one that we need to be really powerful about. When it comes to banning puppy imports, this is a campaign that that feels like its time really has come in relation to this. During lockdown, thousands of people felt something was missing from their homes, and it was a pet-sized hole. And they have bought more and more and more animals. And I like the contribution from the Select Committee Chair when he spoke about whether this market is sustainable. It's not sustainable, but nor do I see in the Animal Welfare Plan from the Minister a response to that. So I'd be grateful if the Minister could not skip over that mark when she gets to it. I think we need to recognise that there are things that need to be improved in this action plan. And so when the legislation does come forwards, I hope that some of the suggestions that have been mentioned here will be taken up. I feel that to date, speaking frankly, and I have a lot of time for this, Minister, but the government as a whole has dragged its feet on some of these issues for too long. And I think it is also fuelling a dog abandonment catastrophe, because the lack of action now is fueling animals with behavioural issues, with real problems that are doing that. And the member for Strangford spoke passionately about dog abandonment issues, which I think should have had a much more prominent position in this debate along the way. I want to say thank you to those people like Mark Abraham and others, the Mirror campaign talking about puppy smuggling, the real fantastic focus that we've had on this one here. And we need proper action, and that should also include focus, I think, on making sure that there's no imports for puppies younger than 6 months as part of this. Final point I'd just like to raise, Mr Mundell, is that we have a real opportunity, I think, here to have an element of cross-party consensus in bold action. So can I wish the Minister the very best of luck to strengthen the legislation that her department is currently preparing. I think the member for Bury had made a very good plea for Gizmo's law to be included, and I would echo that in relation to this, because it is in these coming weeks, before the Minister publishes the first readings of these bills, where the chance for us to make sure that this legislation is not good just in terms of sound bites, but good in terms of action are really taking place. And I wish the Minister the very best of luck for that, because there will be plenty of MPs in this place that will be holding her accountable if we see good sound bites, but not good action. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Victoria Prentis, and if you could leave just a couple of minutes so that Mr Colburn can respond to the debate.
And I'd like to start by thanking the member for Carshalton and Wallington for bringing this debate, in which I know he was ably assisted by his dogs Willow and Lola, and probably Benji and Bella the rabbits as well. He is a strong champion of animal welfare, and I know that he speaks on behalf of many, many of his constituents when he raises these issues in Parliament. I'd also like to thank all other honourable members who took part in this debate, including very distinguished members, several of them from the EFRA committee who have worked hard in this area, and many other members who have spoken repeatedly in the debates that we have on animal welfare. What they say is listened to, and I hope that I will be able to reassure members in the room on some of the points that they raise, that they will be imminently brought forward into legislation, and that we have a plan for the rest as well. It is not possible to do everything at once, and you will realise, Mr Chairman, from the number of actions which have been spoken of in the last hour and a half, that there is a great deal to do. I'd also like to thank the public who engaged with the petitions, and indeed the organisations who worked so very hard to provide all of us with the evidence that we need to make proper legislation. Animal welfare is one of the very highest priorities for this government. We know that animals pay a valuable contribution to all of our lives, and indeed to the planet which we share with them. This is why we recently published an action plan for animal welfare, and why we've started the process of legislation to bring many of the issues that we've discussed today into effect. I do want to manage expectation, though, because not all of the answers are in fact legislative. The public need to be involved, and where we have issues of animal welfare that are already contrary to the law, it is important that these are called out, as was suggested by the Shadow Minister. And I totally agree that enforcement is critically important, and it is often the case that we need to work cross-government department to make sure that these laws actually take effect. Bite, I was going to say, and stop myself. The Pet Theft Task Force is an example of this, launched just under a month ago and due to report later this year. It's also important that we work together, both cross-party and as four nations, to make sure that we put into action what we've talked about today. We also have an important role, as many members have said, as a global leader on the animal welfare front, and that leads me very firmly to the issue of detaching shark fins, where we really want to be seen to demonstrate global leadership. We're strongly opposed as a government to shark finning. We banned finning nearly 20 years ago, and since 2009 we've enforced a fins naturally attached policy which applies to UK vessels. We launched a call for evidence which closed earlier this year, and the evidence we got from that has helped us to draft legislation which will seek to ban all fins which are not naturally attached to the carcass from being imported to and exported from the UK, except for extremely limited scientific exceptions. This will get rid of the high personal allowance mentioned by my honourable friend in his opening speech. I am not able to give an exact date for the introduction of this bill, but I would like to reassure honourable members that we are moving at pace to make sure that we get this legislation absolutely right. On puppy smuggling, we will very, very shortly show how we will fulfil our manifesto commitment, and I urge honourable members to watch the news very closely, very shortly on this in this area. The new legislation, when it's introduced, will reduce the number of dogs, cats and ferrets, and I should draw my attention, Mr Mundell, it's not in the Register of Members' Interest, perhaps it should be that we have a ferret at home, and a cat actually, that can be moved up the pet travel rules, that can be moved within pet travel rules in order to prevent unscrupulous traders exploiting the rules. As we all know, there have been loopholes in the rules. What we don't want to do is to encourage animals being imported when heavily pregnant, because we make a rule about importing, reducing the age limit on puppies. It is really important that we draft this new legislation very, very carefully and in conjunction with those who work on the ground, so that we can actually make laws that are enforceable. We've heard many honourable members have mentioned that pets imported illegally are often in poor health, they've been brought up under poor welfare conditions, they've been subject to horrific abuses, and there are many reasons for making sure that we get this absolutely right. We will also, probably via secondary legislation, bring forward regulations to introduce new restrictions, both of commercial and non-commercial imports, on welfare grounds. The sort of rule that we could introduce could include a new minimum age for puppy imports, and indeed restrictions on the import of heavily pregnant bitches. And it is important that we are able to bring in those regulations in a very specific way to enable us to close loopholes. On the Republic of Ireland point, we work closely with DERA and we will continue to work with DAFM in the Republic to put a stop to the abhorrent trade. On dogs subject to mutilations, the honourable gentleman raised in particular DIY cropping kits. I would remind him and remind everybody in the room, and indeed remind the general public, that cropping is illegal in this country. It is an offence under the Animal Welfare Act 2006. Later this month, that the sentences available under that Act become much longer, as honourable members know. There should not be dogs with cropped ears available domestically, except for those which have already, sadly, been cropped. We are going to bring in powers to enable us to bring in new restrictions on welfare grounds in the future. We will need to work very closely on closing the loopholes, but I think all of us and the public have a role to play in calling out bad practice where it is seen. It's not only sharks and puppies that the government intends to protect. We have really ambitious plans across the animal welfare spectrum. The Animal Welfare Sentencing Act became law, as I've already mentioned, which means that from the end of this month, the prison sentence available for animal cruelty will move from 6 months to 5 years, which is something that I think many people in this room should be very proud of. We introduced the Animal Welfare Sentience Bill, which will recognise and enshrine animal sentience in law and make sure that ministers take animal welfare into account when making policy generally. I can't break Mr Mundell without mentioning farm animal welfare. So many animals are affected by the laws and regulations in this space. Very, very shortly, the honourable member from Southend West will be very, very pleased to know we will introduce measures to end the export of live animals for fattening and slaughter, and indeed to update the law on livestock worrying. And it is important that honourable members continue to watch this space on keeping primates and how that is regulated in future as well. Gizmo's law, I can never look at the honourable gentleman for Bury North without calling him Gizmo, actually. He mentions this frequently to me. It is awful to lose a cat to a road traffic accident. I have done so myself. We have a manifesto commitment to introduce compulsory microchipping of cats, as he knows, and we have consulted on this fully this year. We will respond later this year. If legislation isn't imminent on this, I can undertake to continue to engage with him on this important area. In summary, Mr Mundell, there is a great deal to do, but I would like to reassure members of the government's commitment to protecting and enhancing the welfare of all animals.
Thank you, and I call Elliot Colburn to conclude the debate. Mr Colburn.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and can I thank the Minister for her response as well. Indeed, I was assisted by my dogs and bunnies in preparing for today's debate. But can I also thank all honourable and right honourable members for their passionate contributions to today's debate. Time prevents me, sadly, from going into everyone's contribution, but I do think it has demonstrated the level of interest and the strength of feeling across the House on issues relating to animal welfare and how keen members are to see us take that important action. And I apologise, as several members have mentioned, if I've eaten into their content that they wanted to raise throughout the course of today's debate. But could I also thank the petitioners for those who signed all 3 of these petitions. It has demonstrated that the petition system in the UK truly can bring about change. So I encourage them to keep signing petitions and to keep engaging with the petition system, because it is clearly a very powerful tool, and I'm proud to sit as a member of the Petitions Committee. But we are all looking forward to seeing these measures get onto the statute book very soon indeed. So as the Minister requested of us, I will indeed be watching this space very, very soon, very closely indeed. And I hope that we can all be seen together in the Commons soon to be debating this issue again and bringing these measures into law. But Mr. Mundell, on that basis, I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered E-petitions 300535, 326261 and 574305 relating to the Government's Action Plan for Animal Welfare. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 6 p.m. Please, will members leave the room promptly by the